Mafia boss entered the room in anger, until he saw his ex asleep with their triplets in his bed. The mansion's iron gates groaned open under the downpour, their echo cutting through the quiet night like the growl of a beast disturbed from sleep. Damian Moretti's car slid through the puddled driveway, black tires crushing gravel as thunder rolled across the city skyline. Inside the car, his fists clenched around the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched. Betrayal tasted metallic on his tongue, sharper than the gunpowder still clinging to his clothes. The meeting had gone wrong. His trusted lieutenants had fed information to his rivals, leaks that almost cost him his empire. His jaw tightened as he stepped into the marble hallway, rain dripping from his coat, every step of his polished shoes echoing off the cold, cavernous silence. The guards at the door avoided his eyes, bowing their heads like condemned men before judgment. Damian's name carried power and fear in equal measure, and tonight, both seemed to twist around him like smoke. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to silence the air. With a flick of his hand, he dismissed them and began walking up the staircase, his pulse hammering with a rhythm born of fury and disbelief. The grand chandelier above swayed slightly from the draft, its light refracting across the gold veins of the walls. Damian's reflection glimmered faintly in the polished banister, sharp, dangerous, unrecognizable even to himself. He thought of the men who had betrayed him, of the empire he'd built with blood and brilliance, now cracking under deceit. But beneath all that rage, there was something deeper clawing at his chest, a faint ache, a ghost of something lost. He pushed the thought away. Emotions were for the weak, and weakness had no place in the life of a man who ruled crime from the shadows. Yet tonight, something in the silence of his home felt wrong. There were murmurs in the halls he didn't recognize, whispers in the dark that seemed too soft for his hardened world. His eyes narrowed as he approached the double oak doors of his private suite, a place no one dared enter without permission. But the handle was slightly ajar. A cold rush went down his spine. No one would dare break into his room. His breath grew shallow as his instincts screamed danger, his hand automatically reaching for the pistol tucked under his jacket. The metal met his palm, familiar and steady, as he pushed the door open with a sudden, violent shove. It swung inward, slamming against the wall with a thunderous crack that echoed through the mansion. And then, silence. He froze. The world seemed to slow. For a moment, Damian thought he was hallucinating, that the stress of the night had finally fractured his mind. Because lying on his bed, beneath the dim golden light spilling through the curtains, was the last person he ever thought he'd see again. Elena. Her name hit him like a whisper and a wound all at once. She lay there, her long dark hair fanned across the pillow, her face soft, untouched by the chaos of the world outside. Her breathing was calm, almost innocent, her lips slightly parted as if she were lost in a peaceful dream. But Damian knew peace had never followed her, not after the night she vanished 3 years ago without a trace. He had searched every corner of New York, torn apart rival territories, burned alliances, all to find her. And when he failed, he buried her memory beneath the ruins of his own heart. But now, here she was, sleeping in his bed like she'd never left, like time itself had stopped waiting for him to find her. His throat went dry, his pulse stuttering between disbelief and rage. He took a step forward, ready to wake her, to demand an explanation, but then he saw them. 3 small figures curled around her like stars orbiting the sun. Children. One had a small hand resting against her arm. Another clutched a toy soldier close to his chest. And the youngest had her tiny fingers tangled in Elena's hair. Damian's breath hitched. Their faces glowed in the faint light, angelic and calm. And yet, each one carried something that shouldn't have been possible, the same sharp jawline, the same shade of dark, stormy hair, the same faint dimple that marked his own reflection. He stumbled back slightly, his hand still gripping the gun though he no longer remembered why he'd drawn it. His mind screamed denial, logic trying to make sense of what his heart already knew. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But the truth stared at him from the small rise and fall of their chests. His body trembled, years of control dissolving into confusion and fear. No, he whispered to the quiet, his voice breaking through the weight of the room. It can't be. His world, the empire, the rage, the betrayal, suddenly felt small, meaningless compared to what lay in front of him. The sound of thunder outside cracked the silence, lightning casting a pale glow over the scene. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, the same fragrance Elena used to wear when she'd curl up beside him in another lifetime. He didn't realize tears had gathered in his eyes until one slipped down, warm against his cold skin. He took another step, careful not to wake them, though every instinct screamed for answers. His breath trembled as he looked at her hand resting protectively over the smallest child's back. He reached out, his fingers hovering in the space between them, afraid that touching her would make the illusion vanish. His heart, the heart he'd buried in violence and vengeance, began to beat differently, faster, weaker, alive. And then, in that heavy silence, something shifted. A tiny sound broke through the air, a soft yawn. One of the children stirred, stretching before blinking up at him with sleepy eyes that mirrored his own. Damian froze as the child tilted his head, curiosity and warmth mixing in his small voice. "Daddy?" For a heartbeat the world stopped breathing. The storm outside seemed to hold its thunder. And Damian Moretti felt every wall of his fortress tighten around him until even air was scarce. The word daddy echoing in his skull like a gunshot that hit something soft instead of bone, tearing through the layers of armor he had built across years of blood and betrayal. He stared at the boy who had spoken, a child no older than 3 or 4, eyes wide and brown like polished chestnuts, a face so familiar it hurt. There was the same slant of the eyebrows, the same stubborn tilt of the mouth that Damian saw every morning in the mirror before a war. The boy blinked, confusion mixing with wonder, then turned toward the woman still sleeping beside him as if to confirm that she was real, that he hadn't wandered into someone else's dream. Damian's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to demand who they were and why fate had decided to mock him with such a sight, yet no sound left his mouth. The boy tilted his head, uncertain, and whispered again, softer this time, "Daddy, you came back." That whisper cracked him open. The gun in his hand felt suddenly obscene, heavy with all the wrong meanings, and he lowered it to the floor, the metal kissing the marble with a dull thud. He crouched without thinking, drawn closer by a gravity stronger than logic. The child's tiny fingers reached toward him with the unguarded faith of someone who knew nothing of violence, and when they brushed against his own, Damian flinched. The touch was warm, human, terrifying. Behind them, Elena stirred. A faint frown formed between her brows before her lashes fluttered open, and for a second she looked like she didn't recognize where she was. Then her gaze found him, and everything inside the room shifted. The air thickened with the weight of 3 years of silence. Her lips parted, his name dying on them before it could escape. She bolted upright, instinctively drawing the children close, her body a shield forged from fear and love. Damian rose slowly, palms open, his eyes locked on hers, the cold fury that had ruled him for so long dissolving into something he couldn't name. "What is this?" he whispered, voice rasped from disbelief. "Why are you here, Elena? Who are they?" She swallowed, her breathing uneven, scanning his face like a woman staring at a ghost. "Damian, please," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Don't wake them, they answer me," he cut her off, though the strength in his tone cracked midway. One of the children whimpered at the sound, and guilt slammed into him like a bullet. He had faced death countless times, but never had he felt this kind of terror, the fear of being the monster in a child's dream. Elena reached out a trembling hand, gesturing for calm. "They're just sleeping," she said. "Please, lower your voice." She gathered the blankets around the small bodies, pressing a kiss to each tiny head. Damian couldn't move. Every motion she made tore at something deep within him. He noticed how thin she'd become, how the old confidence in her posture had been replaced by weariness, how her once carefree eyes now carried the cautious flicker of someone who'd run too long. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, barely louder than a breath. "No one breaks into my house and lives to tell about it." The words sounded hollow even to him. Elena looked up, meeting his gaze, and for an instant the years between them vanished. He saw the woman who used to laugh in the middle of his chaos, the woman who once told him that his heart wasn't as dark as he believed. But the memory burned too bright. "I didn't break in," she whispered. "The doors were open. Your men? They didn't stop me." That made no sense, and yet Damian didn't question it. His mind was still tangled in the sight of those children, in the echo of that word daddy. He took a cautious step forward, scanning their faces, the smallest girl with curls the color of night. Another boy with his mother's eyes and his smile, the first boy who now hid beneath the blanket peeking out with one curious glance. The longer he looked, the harder it became to breathe. Somewhere deep inside, beneath all the suspicion and anger, something fragile stirred, recognition. "They look like you," he murmured before he could stop himself. Elena's lips trembled. She looked away, biting back whatever truth hovered on her tongue. That silence said more than words ever could. Damian's pulse thundered in his ears, each beat a question he was too afraid to ask. He wanted to demand answers, to unleash the fury boiling inside him, but one look at the tiny hands clutching the sheets stilled him. Instead he found himself whispering, "Elena? What have you done?" She shook her head slowly, tears glistening in the dim light, but before she could speak a sharp crack of thunder rolled through the night, startling the children awake. The room filled with soft cries, and instinct overpowered rage. Damian knelt beside the bed, unsure what to do, only knowing he couldn't bear the sound of their fear. He reached out awkwardly, and one of them clutched his sleeve, seeking comfort from the stranger towering over them. The warmth of that small hand seeped into his skin like a brand. Elena watched, breathless, as if seeing a part of him she thought was gone forever. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the room in white flashes that carved every detail into memory, the trembling of his hands, the shimmer of tears he didn't notice, the fragile peace that existed only in this impossible moment. He should have walked away, demanded his guards remove them, pretended none of this was real. But he didn't. He sat there beside the bed, surrounded by the sound of rain and children's hiccuping breaths, until the rage that had driven him home tonight dissolved completely. He didn't understand how she had returned or why fate had chosen this night to place her back in his life. But deep down, beneath the scars and the steel, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever waited beyond this door he had just opened, his life would never close it again. The rain had softened to a slow, steady rhythm against the tall windows, the sound weaving through the quiet like a heartbeat that refused to settle. Damian stood where he had been all night, his eyes tracing the faint outline of dawn leaking through the curtains. The air inside the room carried the faint scent of lavender and gun oil, a strange mixture of peace and danger that clung to every breath. For a long moment he said nothing. His thoughts drifted between disbelief and the fragile warmth that had flickered through him when the children's hands touched his. But the silence broke when Elena gasped awake, her body jerking upright as if she'd been dragged from a nightmare. In an instant she was on her feet, the blanket gathered around her like armor, her eyes wide and feral. She moved between him and the children with an instinct that was pure fire, one arm stretched back to shield them. "Don't come near them, Damian." Her voice cut through the still air, trembling yet sharp enough to pierce the distance between them. He hadn't expected fear, certainly not her fear, and for a fraction of a second it stung more than any betrayal. He lifted his hands slowly, his expression unreadable, the shadows under his eyes deepening. "I wasn't going to hurt them," he said, though even to himself it sounded like a lie scraped raw by disbelief. Elena's chest heaved. Her breath came fast. Behind her the smallest child whimpered, and she turned slightly to hush them, her voice suddenly soft, maternal, breaking under the weight of exhaustion. Damian watched her movements, the way her trembling fingers stroked their hair, the way she stood ready to defend them with nothing but her own body, and the realization struck him like a cold blade: she had done this alone. Without him, through nights that must have been filled with the same fear now written across her face. His anger surged again, trying to fill the cracks that sympathy had opened. "You disappeared," he said, his voice hardening to that dangerous calm that once silenced entire rooms. "No calls. No message. Not even a body to bury. 3 years, Elena. 3 damn years." He took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath his shoes. And now you're standing in my house, in my bed, with my kids? Tell me how that makes sense." The words hissed out, controlled but shaking at their edges. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. "I had to protect them," she said, her voice cracking. "You think I wanted this? If your enemies found out, they would have killed us all." The plea in her tone reached for him, but he fought it off, fists clenching at his sides. The rain grew louder, drumming against the glass like the city itself wanted to listen. "You should have trusted me," he said quietly. "You should have let me protect you." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand, Damian. There were people you couldn't control. There were things bigger than even you." She pressed a hand against her chest, as if trying to steady her heart. "Every time your name was whispered, someone bled. I couldn't let our children be part of that world. I couldn't watch them grow up surrounded by violence, by fear." The words sliced deep. He looked at her as though she'd spoken a foreign language. "Our children," he repeated, tasting the phrase for the first time. It filled the space between them with an ache that neither could escape. For the first time in years, Damian felt small in his own house, stripped of control, standing before a truth too heavy to carry. The man who had ruled men with terror suddenly felt like a stranger in his own skin. "You kept them from me," he said, his voice barely more than a breath. "You made me believe you were dead." "I had no choice," she whispered. "If I had told you, they would have come for you. For us." Her tears fell freely now, streaking down her pale cheeks. "Every day I prayed that you'd forget me, that you'd find peace. But every night I woke up wishing you were there." The confession twisted something inside him. He wanted to hate her. Hatred would have been easier. But as he looked at her, all he saw was the same woman who once pulled him from the edge of his own darkness. The silence between them thickened until it felt alive, pressing against their chests, demanding one of them to break it. Damian turned away first, walking toward the window, the city lights bleeding through the rain. His reflection stared back, hollow, angry, human. "You think hiding them made them safe?" he said, voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "You think running from me was protection? The second you vanished, every enemy I had started hunting ghosts. You put targets on their backs without even knowing." She flinched at the accusation, shaking her head in disbelief. "You can't mean that." "I mean every word." His tone snapped like a whip, but beneath it lived the ache of a man too wounded to be cruel. Behind him, one of the children murmured in their sleep, and the sound pulled him back from the edge of fury. He exhaled slowly, pressing his hand against the cold glass, watching the storm outside rage without mercy. "All I ever did was fight to build something worth keeping," he said quietly. "And somehow, everything I loved still found a way to leave." The confession fell heavy, swallowed by the rhythm of the rain. Elena stared at his back, her lips trembling with words she couldn't say. For a moment neither of them moved. The only sound was the whisper of wind threading through the curtains. Then a faint buzz cut through the stillness. Damian frowned, reaching into his coat pocket for his phone. The screen lit up with an unknown number. He opened it without thinking, the soft glow reflecting in his eyes. A single message blinked on the screen, the letters sharp and mocking, "Now that she's back. You'll lose them all again. Tick-tock, Moretti." He felt the color drain from his face as the words burned into him like acid. Behind him, Elena's voice broke the silence, small and terrified. "What is it, Damian?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the message. The storm outside mirroring the one rising inside his chest, for a long moment. Damian stood frozen, staring at the message on his phone as though the words themselves were poison. "Now that she's back. You'll lose them all again." His thumb hovered over the screen, but his mind was a battlefield, the fury that had built his empire colliding with the terror of a man who suddenly had something to lose. Elena's breathing was uneven, her back pressed against the headboard as she held the children close, as though any wrong move might shatter the fragile space between them. "Who sent that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Damian's jaw flexed. "Someone who's been inside my walls," he said coldly, his eyes scanning the shadows of the room. His instincts screamed danger, not the kind that came from rival families, but something personal, calculated, someone who knew where to hit him hardest. Rain poured harder outside, drumming against the windows, echoing the chaos building in his chest. The children stirred, sensing the tension, and Elena gently whispered for them to go back to sleep. Damian turned away, his reflection caught in the mirror, a man feared by thousands, but right now, just one who had lost control of his own life. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. "Elena, tell me the truth," he demanded quietly, stepping closer. "Who helped you hide all these years? You couldn't have done it alone." She hesitated, her lips parting, but her eyes darted away. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." That answer hit harder than a bullet. Damian took another step, lowering his tone but not his intensity. "Try me." The air between them thickened with memories, late nights, whispered promises, the day she vanished without a trace. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking. "Someone inside your circle helped me disappear. Someone who wanted you destroyed, Damian." The words cut through him like glass. Inside his circle? His loyal men? His family? His empire suddenly felt like a hollow structure built on betrayal. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing, trying to think like the predator he once was, but every time his eyes met Elena's, the predator faltered. Thunder shook the mansion as Damian turned to the window, watching the lightning crawl across the sky. "If they wanted you dead, they would have killed you," he muttered. "They want me to suffer first." Elena's voice was soft but firm. "They know your weakness now." He turned sharply toward her. "And what's that?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Us." The word hit him like a confession and a curse all at once. For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. The man who could command armies was speechless before a woman who'd once held his heart and 3 tiny lives he never knew existed. Silence fell again, thick, aching, unspoken. Damian finally spoke, his tone lower, more human. "You should have trusted me, Elena." She shook her head, tears shining in the dim light. "Trust would have gotten us all killed." Before Damian could respond, the lights flickered, once, twice, then died completely. The mansion fell into darkness. The storm outside howled louder, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of glass breaking echoed through the halls. Damian's instincts ignited instantly. He reached for the gun tucked under his belt, moving silently to the door. "Stay with them," he whispered. Elena grabbed his wrist, fear flooding her eyes. "Don't go out there." But he didn't answer, his expression hardened into that of the man the underworld feared. He stepped into the dark hallway, his senses sharp, scanning every sound, every shadow. The air was heavy with danger. The faint scent of smoke reached him. Then a voice, distorted through the mansion's speaker system, whispered mockingly, "Welcome home, Moretti. Let's see how good you really are when the war starts in your own house." Damian's grip tightened on the gun, his pulse steady despite the chaos. He glanced back once toward the room, toward Elena clutching their children, and something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival, redemption, and the one thing he'd never let anyone touch again. As thunder roared outside and the mansion filled with the echo of his enemies' laughter, Damian stepped deeper into the darkness. The game had begun. And this time, the stakes were his blood, his heart, and the family he never knew he had. The hallway suddenly illuminated with a faint red glow, lasers cutting through the air, and Damian realized, too late, that someone had activated the mansion's internal defense system. A voice crackled again, colder this time. "One wrong move, and they all burn." The red warning lights still pulsed faintly along the hallway walls when Damian stormed into the control room, drenched from the rain seeping in through the cracked windows. His men scrambled in confusion, half of them shouting orders, others searching the camera feeds. Damian's voice cut through the chaos like steel. "Shut down external access. No one leaves this house until I say so." The fear in his tone wasn't of death, it was of losing what he'd just found. He replayed the memory of the intruder's voice over the speaker, analyzing every tone, every echo. It wasn't random. It was personal. Someone had waited for this moment, for Elena to return, just to pull the trigger on his heart. His hand clenched the desk as he leaned over the monitors, scanning the security feeds. Shadows moved across the mansion's perimeter. He couldn't tell if they were his guards or ghosts of enemies past. He turned sharply to Marco, his head of security. Double every post. No one stands alone. Marco nodded, but Damian caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Trust was poison now. Every man could be the leak, every ally could be the snake. As the storm battered the estate, Damian's reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, the boss who once ruled with fear now haunted by something deeper. He switched the feed to the east wing, where the children slept. Static flickered across the screen for a moment, then cleared, and his blood ran cold. A dark silhouette moved outside the window, slow, deliberate, holding something long and metallic. "No," he whispered, bolting upright. "East wing, now." His voice thundered through the halls as he sprinted, his footsteps echoing like gunshots against marble floors. "Lock down the corridors." He barked into his comms, but before anyone could answer, a single suppressed shot broke the night. The glass exploded inward with a sharp crack. Damian's instincts took over. He dove through the doorway just as Elena screamed, shoving her and the children to the floor, covering them with his body as shards rained over them. The children cried in terror, their tiny hands clutching Elena's arms. Damian's heart pounded against the floor as another shot tore through the curtains. "Stay down," he hissed, drawing his gun with one hand while keeping his body over them. He aimed toward the window but saw only darkness, a flicker of motion disappearing into the storm. His guards burst into the room seconds later, rifles drawn, scanning the perimeter. "He's gone," one shouted. Damian rose, his expression carved from ice. "No one leaves this property until I find who let him in." Elena held the children tightly, tears streaking her face. "They were aiming for them, Damian," she cried. "Not you, them." That truth sliced through him like a blade. The one thing his enemies never could reach, his heart, was now exposed in flesh and blood. He turned to his men, fury igniting in his veins. "Check every inch of the grounds. I want tire tracks, footprints, anything." But as they rushed out, something glinted on the shattered glass near the window. Damian stepped closer, boots crunching over shards. A small photograph lay face down, half soaked by rain. He picked it up carefully, flipping it over. It was Elena, younger, eyes full of life, and on the back, smeared in crimson letters, one word, traitor. For a moment, the world went silent. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Damian stared at the word, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the photo. His mind spiraled. Was it a message to him or a revelation about her? He turned slowly toward Elena, his expression unreadable. "Explain this," he said, his voice low, dangerous. She looked at the photo and froze, her lips parting in disbelief. I don't know where that came from." She stammered, reaching for it, but he pulled it away. His eyes searched hers for the truth, but all he saw was fear. The same fear he once mistook for guilt. "Someone wants me to believe you betrayed me," he muttered, pacing toward the window. "And they're doing a damn good job." Elena shook her head, voice trembling. "Damian, please, you have to believe me." He looked out into the storm, lightning flashing across his face, illuminating the turmoil behind his eyes. He wanted to believe her. God, he needed to. But in his world, love had always been the first weapon enemies used against him. He stared at the rain pelting the ground, the wind twisting the trees like dark claws, and whispered to himself, "They're watching." He turned back to her, voice steady but hollow. "Whoever sent that message earlier? They're still here." Elena's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Damian's gaze drifted to the security cameras mounted in the corners. "They don't need to break in," he said grimly. "They're already inside." Just as he spoke, the nearest monitor flickered to life, showing live footage of their own room, from an angle that shouldn't exist. Someone was watching them right now, from inside the mansion. Damian's pulse quickened, and for the first time in years, fear, real fear, crept into the eyes of the Mafia king. The room was silent except for the soft whimpering of the children and the heavy sound of rain crashing against the broken glass. Damian stared at the glowing screen, his reflection flickering in the distorted image, himself, Elena, the bed, the shattered window, all captured from a hidden angle. His heart thudded once, hard, before his instincts fully took control. He lunged forward, yanking the monitor cables from the wall, shattering the connection, but the damage was done. Someone had been inside his home, installing hidden cameras, watching every private second. Elena gasped softly, her voice breaking, "Damian? How long have they been watching us?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was a storm: betrayal, violation, and something more dangerous, fear for the family he barely had time to know. His mansion, once his fortress, now felt like a cage built for his downfall. He paced across the floor, hand on his gun, his shadow dancing in the flashes of lightning. "No one knew she was here," he muttered to himself. "No one except my inner circle." His voice hardened as he called out, "Marco." His most trusted man rushed into the room, face pale, drenched from the rain outside. "Boss, we found something," he said, handing over a small black device, no larger than a coin. Damian turned it in his palm, a hidden transmitter, still blinking faintly red. "This was under the crib," Marco added quietly. Elena's knees gave out, and she collapsed beside the bed, clutching her chest as if her heart had cracked in two. "Under their bed," she whispered. Damian's gaze burned through the device. "Whoever planted this knew every inch of this place." His eyes lifted slowly, cold as the storm. "That means one of us." The words hit the air like gunfire, making even Marco flinch. Damian had built his empire on loyalty, on blood oaths sealed with fear, yet here, in his home, the betrayal had walked right through his doors. He stormed past Marco into the hallway, his footsteps echoing, shouting orders into his comms. "Seal the gates. Scan every wall, every floor. I want every hidden device torn out by sunrise." His voice carried through the mansion like thunder, his men scattering to obey. Elena stayed in the room, her arms wrapped around the children, whispering soothing words even though her own hands trembled. She looked toward the window. The word traitor still burned into her mind, and for the first time, she wondered if this was all her fault, if coming back had doomed them all. Downstairs, Damian ripped open panels, tearing apart the walls with his bare hands until he found another hidden device. This one near the dining hall. His pulse quickened, there were too many. Someone had turned his home into a theater, and he and his family were the show. Marco followed him, sweating, his voice unsteady. "Boss, whoever did this. It's professional. Military grade." Damian froze, eyes narrowing. "Then it's not a rival family. This is bigger." He thought of every enemy he'd crushed, every partner he'd betrayed to rise to the throne. The list was endless. "They're not trying to kill me," he said finally, his tone low and dark. "They want to humiliate me. Make me watch as they destroy everything I love." The words hung heavy between them. Upstairs, thunder cracked again, and Elena flinched as another faint noise came from the hall, footsteps, light and measured. She turned, holding her breath, calling softly, "Damian?" But when she peeked out, the hallway was empty. The lights flickered once more, and in that split second of darkness, she thought she saw movement, a shadow slipping behind the curtain at the far end. Her heart jumped. She ran back inside, locking the door, whispering for the children to stay quiet. Moments later, Damian returned, his shirt torn, streaked with dust, fury carved into his face. "They're inside my walls," he said, grabbing his phone, typing commands into the mansion's private network. "Whoever's controlling these cameras? I'll find them." The monitors in the control room flickered to life one by one, showing feeds of the mansion, empty corridors, rain-slick windows, flickering lights. Then one feed froze. Damian's jaw tightened. The image showed the children's room, from inside the closet. A live feed, seconds old. He and Elena exchanged a horrified look, then both turned toward the closet door. Damian raised his gun, stepping slowly, every movement silent. The rain muffled everything outside, making each heartbeat deafening. He reached the door, counted to 3, and yanked it open. Nothing. Only shadows and silence. But on the floor lay a single earpiece, still warm. Someone had just been there. Damian kicked the door shut, his voice cold as death. "They're watching every move we make." Elena's voice cracked. "Then what do we do?" He looked at her, the storm reflecting in his eyes. "We stop being hunted," he said. "And start hunting." His tone was quiet, but beneath it burned a fire she hadn't heard in years, the return of the man everyone feared, but she once loved. He walked to the window, watching the dark hills beyond the estate, where shadows seemed to move in the distance. "They think I'm blind," he murmured, "but I see them now." He turned to Marco. "Prepare the armory. I want eyes in every direction before dawn." Marco hesitated. "Boss, with all due respect. If this was planted inside, it means someone close." Damian cut him off with a glare. "I know." He didn't need to say more. Outside, lightning split the sky in two, and for a brief instant, the outline of a man standing in the woods became visible through the window, watching. When the light faded, he was gone. Damian's pulse hammered, but his face stayed stone still. He looked at Elena and the children one last time before whispering, "They made one mistake." Elena frowned. "What's that?" He turned toward the shattered glass, rain blowing across his face. "They reminded me what I'm fighting for." Just then, Damian's phone vibrated again, a live video feed link. He clicked it. The footage showed one of his guards tied to a chair, blood dripping down his face, and behind him, a masked figure whispered into the camera, "You can't protect them, Moretti. Not from what's already inside your house." The flickering glow of the computer screens painted Damian's face in shades of blue and shadow as the video feed ended, leaving only static. The sound of the storm outside had softened to a distant hum, but inside the mansion, the air was heavy, a silence thick with unspoken truths. Damian turned slowly toward Elena, the weight of the last hours pressing down like a vice. His empire was bleeding, his walls infiltrated, his men compromised, and through it all, one question echoed relentlessly in his head: why her? Why did every road, every betrayal, every hidden truth lead back to her? He stood there for a long time, jaw tight, staring at her trembling figure. "Elena," he said finally, voice low and raw, "what did you do?" She flinched at the sound of his tone, not the voice of the man she'd once known, but of the ghost he'd become. She tried to speak, but words tangled in her throat. The children were asleep now, huddled in the other room under Marco's guard, unaware of the storm raging between their parents. Damian took a step closer. "No more lies," he warned, eyes burning with fury and desperation. "If you want to keep them alive, you tell me everything. Now." Elena's eyes glistened as tears threatened to spill, her hands shaking as she clutched the edge of the desk. For a long, suffocating moment, she said nothing, then finally whispered, "You won't forgive me." He didn't blink. "Try me." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, the storm outside seeming to mirror the chaos inside her. "I was never supposed to love you, Damian," she said, each word trembling with pain. "I was sent to destroy you." His expression froze. The room tilted, the air thickened, and time seemed to stop. "What did you just say?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a gunshot. She took a deep breath, her voice cracking. "I was an informant. For the FBI." The words shattered the silence like glass. Damian stepped back as if struck. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No, you're lying." But her eyes, those same eyes that once looked at him with love, held only truth and guilt now. "I was assigned to get close to you," she said through tears, "to learn everything about your family, your operations. To bring down the Moretti empire." Damian's breath came slow, controlled, but his heart was chaos. Every kiss, every secret, every night they'd shared now twisted into something venomous. "You used me," he said, voice hollow. "You built a case on my life." She tried to move closer, but he stepped back, rage simmering just beneath the surface. "You think I planned this?" she cried. "That I meant to fall in love with you?" Her words trembled with desperation. "I didn't expect you to be human, Damian. I didn't expect you to have a soul beneath all that darkness." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "A soul? You destroyed mine the day you walked out. She shook her head, stepping closer despite his glare. I ran because I had to. When I found out I was pregnant, the Bureau wanted me to keep you close, they wanted leverage. Your children as bait. Her voice broke. I couldn't let that happen. Not to them. Not to you. Damian's chest tightened, anger and sorrow colliding like thunder. He turned away, pacing toward the shattered window, the storm's wind whipping through the curtains. His reflection looked fractured in the glass, half a man, half a monster. So you vanished, he murmured, voice heavy. And let me burn the world down trying to find you. His fists clenched, veins standing out on his arms. Do you know what I did when you left? How many people I buried thinking they took you from me? Elena covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. I thought hiding was the only way to save them. Damian's voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with rage and heartbreak. You didn't save anyone, Elena. You just broke what was left of me. The words hung between them, sharp enough to wound. He turned his back to her, his silhouette framed by lightning flashing beyond the window. You should have told me, he said quietly. I could have protected you. All of you. She shook her head, voice cracking. You don't understand, I was protecting you too. They had proof, Damian. Proof that could destroy you. The only reason you're still standing is because I made them believe you were gone. He froze, his eyes narrowing. Proof? What proof? But before she could answer, she looked past him, her expression shifting from sorrow to horror. Damian noticed the change and turned sharply. The storm's light flickered once more through the window, glinting off something red and moving, a faint dot trembling against Elena's chest. For a split second, the world narrowed to that single spot of color, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. His instincts screamed danger. Don't move, he hissed, his hand reaching for his gun. But the laser held steady, centered right over her heart. Elena's eyes widened in shock as realization dawned. Damian. She whispered, her voice shaking. It's happening again. He lunged forward, grabbing her by the shoulders, pulling her down just as the window behind them shattered inward with a deafening crack. A single suppressed gunshot echoed through the mansion. Glass sprang through the air like rain. Damian threw himself over her, heart pounding, the metallic taste of fear sharp in his mouth. He heard the children crying from the next room, Marco shouting orders. Chaos erupting once again. He pressed Elena against the floor, his hand gripping hers as he whispered urgently. Don't you dare close your eyes. She looked up at him through tears, her lips trembling. You have to save them, Damian. Whatever happens to me, he cut her off with a harsh whisper. Don't you say that. He turned his head toward the window, catching a glimpse of the shadow fleeing into the storm, vanishing into darkness. The laser dot was gone, but its echo burned into his memory. They're not just after me anymore, he murmured, voice breaking. They're after everything I ever loved. He turned back to her, breath heavy, his mind reeling, and froze. A dark crimson stain spread slowly beneath her hand. Elena's eyes fluttered, her voice a whisper barely audible through the rain. He found us? Damian, he found us? Damian's world blurred into chaos as the echo of the gunshot faded into the storm. The scent of gunpowder mingled with the sharp tang of rain seeping through the shattered window. His hands pressed against Elena's wound, warm blood spreading fast beneath his fingers. No, 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 stay with me, he growled, his voice cracking between command and desperation. Her eyes fluttered, half open, dazed. It's not deep, she murmured weakly, though the crimson soaking her dress betrayed her lie. Marco burst into the room with 2 guards, weapons raised. Boss. Shooter's gone, north wall breach. Damian didn't look up. Get the medic kit. Now, he barked. One guard sprinted off while the other took position at the door. Thunder rolled overhead like the roar of an angry god, shaking the cracked glass in its frame. Damian tore a strip from his own shirt and pressed it tighter against the wound. You're not dying on me, Elena, he hissed, his breath trembling. She winced, gripping his wrist. You shouldn't care, she whispered faintly. After what I did. Damian leaned closer, his voice a low snarl. You think I stopped caring? You think that's something I know how to do? His words came out as fire and grief entwined. Outside, lightning flashed again, revealing a fresh set of footprints in the mud below the window. Too deliberate to belong to any of his men, the medic arrived. Kneeling beside them, working quickly with trembling hands. Damian stepped back only far enough to grab his gun, checking the chamber, scanning every dark corner of the room. His mansion had never felt so small, so exposed. North wall breach, Marco repeated. We found a rifle on the grass, thermal scope, suppressed. Whoever he was, he knew exactly where to hit. Damian's jaw tightened. He didn't come to kill her, he said quietly. He came to send a message. Elena's breathing steadied slightly as the medic patched her wound, but her eyes remained on Damian, wide with dread. He found us, she repeated, barely audible. He knows about the kids. Damian's stomach twisted. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then his instincts surged to life. Marco, he snapped, get the children to the panic room, now. No one else goes near them. Marco didn't question it. He vanished down the corridor with the guards, his boots pounding against marble, his shouts echoing through the hall. Damian turned back to Elena. Who is he? He demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the thunder. Tell me. She shook her head weakly, tears glistening in her lashes. I don't know his name, she whispered. The bureau called him the broker. He sells secrets, ours, yours, anyone's. He's the one who wanted you both gone. Damian froze. The name stirring something buried deep, rumors he dismissed years ago about a faceless traitor who dealt in the destruction of powerful men. The broker, he repeated under his breath, as if speaking the name would summon the devil himself. Elena reached for him, her voice trembling. He doesn't just want revenge, Damian. He wants control. You were his biggest client once, without knowing it. Damian's eyes snapped to hers. That's impossible. No, she said, shaking her head weakly. Every weapon shipment you funded through offshore accounts, every piece of intel you bought on rival families, it all came from him. He played both sides. He always does. The revelation sank into him like poison, spreading cold through his veins. The storm outside intensified, wind howling through the broken window as if mocking him. So this is his war, Damian murmured. He sets fire to everything, watches us tear each other apart, and when it's over, he collects what's left. He holstered his gun, hands shaking not from fear but fury. Elena watched him with pained eyes. That's why I ran, she whispered. I thought if I disappeared, he'd lose interest. But he never forgets, Damian. He'll come for the children next. Damian turned toward the doorway, his shoulders rigid, his silhouette carved by lightning. Then let him try. He strode across the room, pulling a hidden panel from the wall, revealing a steel safe. Inside lay a small black device, his personal data drive, the one containing years of coded transactions. He plugged it into the computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. If he's tracking us, he's doing it through this network, he muttered. I'm shutting it all down. The screens flickered to life, lines of encrypted data scrolling faster than the eye could follow. Elena tried to sit up, wincing. Damian, wait, he'll see that you're fighting back. He didn't stop. Good, he said. Let him know I'm awake. Then, suddenly, one of the monitors froze, and a new message appeared across the center of the screen in bold red letters, too late. Damian's breath hitched. The sound of metal clanking echoed faintly through the mansion's lower levels, doors locking, systems activating. Marco's voice crackled over the radio, boss. The panic room's sealed from the outside. I can't get the kids in. Elena's eyes went wide with terror. He's inside, Damian. Her words hung like a death sentence. Damian spun toward the hallway, the fury in his gaze replaced by something colder, deadlier. He loaded his weapon, chamber clicking in rhythm with his heartbeat. Stay here, he ordered, his tone final. Don't move, no matter what you hear. She caught his arm as he turned to leave. Please, she whispered, her blood-stained fingers clutching him, promise me you'll save them. He looked down at her, his jaw trembling slightly despite the steel in his eyes. "I already failed once," he said quietly. "I won't again." He stepped into the hall, vanishing into the storm of red lights and alarms that had begun to pulse through the mansion, from the shadows beyond the control room. Unseen by either of them, a man in a rain-soaked trench coat lowered his binoculars, a faint smile curling beneath his mask. He whispered into a small microphone, "Stage 2 complete. Time to take the children." The mansion erupted into chaos before Damian could even reach the second floor. The night split open with the hiss of bullets tearing through glass, shattering chandeliers, and igniting sparks across the marble floor. Alarms wailed, lights flickered, and shadows danced like specters of death across the walls. Damian grabbed Elena by the arm, yanking her behind an overturned table just as a storm of gunfire shredded the corridor. "Down," he barked, pressing her head low as shards of glass rained over them. The roar of gunfire filled the air, close, relentless, organized. Whoever had breached the estate wasn't just a hired crew. They moved like soldiers, their steps coordinated, their aim precise. Damian's instincts surged alive. His pulse slowed, his mind sharpened. He was no longer the man torn between love and betrayal, he was the predator again. With one fluid motion, he drew his sidearm, popped out from cover, and fired twice. 2 shadows dropped instantly. The others hesitated for just a heartbeat, and that was all he needed. He vaulted the table, landing hard on the marble, rolling to the next column as bullets chipped the stone behind him. "Marco!" he shouted into his comm. No response. Static. "Marco, report." Still nothing. His stomach turned cold. He knew what that meant, communication was being jammed. Someone had cut their internal frequencies. Elena crawled behind the couch, clutching the children tightly against her chest, little Leo sobbing, Nico shaking, and Arya frozen in shock. "Stay quiet," she whispered, voice trembling but steady enough to sound like courage. Her body shielded theirs as another round cracked through the windows. Damian spun into the hall, firing down the staircase. A man in black combat gear fell, rolling limp down the steps. 2 more rushed in from the side door. Damian dropped one with a headshot, tackled the other, and slammed his skull into the wall hard enough to leave a streak of red. The metallic smell of blood mixed with smoke and gunpowder filled the air. The house, his fortress, was burning. Curtains caught fire, spreading like orange serpents up the walls. Elena screamed from the other room, "Damian, behind you." He turned just in time to see a blade glinting under the chandelier. The intruder lunged, but Damian sidestepped, twisted the man's arm, and stabbed him in the throat with his own knife. The man gurgled and collapsed. Damian barely breathed as he pulled the weapon free, his knuckles white around the handle. Then, silence. Just the crackle of fire and the whimper of frightened children. Damian rushed back to them, crouching low. Elena's face was pale, streaked with soot and tears. "Are they hurt?" he asked, scanning the children. She shook her head. "Just scared." "Good. Stay with them," he said, standing again, his voice a gravel growl. His boots crunched over broken glass as he moved toward the nearest body, flipping it over. The man's sleeve rolled back, revealing a black tattoo, a crow with a dagger through its beak. Damian's breath hitched. "No," he muttered under his breath, the memories flooding back. Years ago, he'd wiped out the Crows, a ruthless syndicate that trafficked weapons and information. Their leader had died in a fire Damian himself ordered. "This can't be," he whispered. But there it was, inked into the dead man's skin, proof that ghosts had returned to life. Beneath the body, something glimmered, a flash drive, still warm from the man's blood. Damian snatched it up and jammed it into the wall terminal by the staircase. A flicker of light illuminated the soot-darkened screen. A video began to play, static. Then a face appeared, familiar, smiling, cruel. Raphael? Damian's right-hand man. The brother he chose when he had none. "Damian," Raphael's voice came through, calm and venomous. "You built an empire on loyalty, but you never realized loyalty doesn't buy love. We're taking what's yours, Damian. Even your children." The video ended abruptly, replaced by a flashing crow insignia. Damian's blood boiled. "That bastard," he hissed, slamming his fist into the wall hard enough to crack it. Raphael, the man who stood beside him in every war, had betrayed him. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Elena watched him from across the room, shaking her head in disbelief. "Raphael? But he was my most trusted," Damian snapped. "He knew everything, every code, every route, every safe house. He must have sold us out to the broker. And now he's with the crows." His chest heaved as he processed the weight of it. His enemies weren't outside anymore. They had grown from inside his own circle. A faint creak echoed from upstairs, soft, deliberate. Damian froze. His head snapped toward the staircase. "Stay here," he whispered. He stepped forward slowly, gun raised, every muscle tense. The mansion's power flickered again, shadows leaping along the walls like ghosts mocking his rage. He ascended the stairs silently, the floorboards groaning under his boots. The smell of smoke thickened, and from somewhere far above, a soft cry drifted down, a child's voice. "Daddy?" His heart nearly stopped. "Arya?" he called softly. No reply. Only the faint patter of rain through the broken window and the hum of fire eating the edges of his empire. He moved faster now, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. When he reached the top landing, the hallway was empty, until he saw a small shoe lying by the doorway to the children's room. He kicked the door open. The beds were overturned, curtains torn, the window wide open, swaying in the cold night wind. "Arya!" he shouted, scanning the corners. Nothing. He turned toward the hall. "Elena!" "The kids," but before he could finish, a sound cut through the air, a distant scream. A little girl's voice, terrified, echoing from the garden below. Damian ran to the window and looked down, just in time to see a dark figure vanishing into the storm, carrying something small in his arms. "Arya!" The sight made Damian's stomach twist into knots of rage and horror. He slammed his fist against the window frame, glass cracking beneath his hand. "No!" His roar shook the walls, raw and animal, echoing through the smoke-filled house. Down below, Elena's panicked voice carried through the chaos. "Damian! What's happening?" He didn't answer. His mind was already gone, replaced by one thought, sharp and merciless as a blade: whoever took his daughter wouldn't live to see another sunrise. Damian raced down the stairs, blood dripping from his fist, but when he reached the main hall, the front doors were wide open, and outside, through the rain, he saw a single crow feather lying on the ground beside a trail of tiny footprints disappearing into the night. The storm outside raged like a reflection of the chaos within Damian Moretti's soul. Rain slashed against the broken windows, lightning illuminated the blackened halls, and smoke rolled low across the floor like ghosts rising from the ashes of his home. He moved through it all like a phantom himself, silent, furious, unstoppable. The trail of footprints outside the mansion gates led into the woods behind the property, tiny imprints washed quickly by rain. Damian's boots splashed through the mud as he followed, the roar of thunder blending with the pounding of his heart. "Arya!" he bellowed into the storm. No answer. Just the rustle of branches and the faint, mechanical hum of a vehicle hidden somewhere deeper in the darkness. He moved faster, gripping his gun tight, every instinct honed from years of bloodshed snapping into place. Then he saw it, a black van idling beyond the treeline, headlights dimmed, engine rumbling. One of the rear doors was still open. Damian didn't think. He fired twice. The driver's window shattered, the man inside slumping forward. Another figure jumped from the back of the van, dragging a small body wrapped in a blanket. "Arya!" Damian's world narrowed to a single heartbeat. He charged forward, bullets ripping through the night. The man ducked behind the van, firing back. Sparks flew off metal, lighting up the rain-soaked clearing. Damian dove behind a fallen log, mud splattering his face. He fired again, one shot, two, three. The last bullet hit its mark. The man spun, collapsed, the blanket slipping from his grasp. Damian sprinted, dropping his gun as he fell to his knees beside her. "Arya," he whispered, pulling the blanket away. Her face was pale but breathing, her tiny hands clutching the locket Elena had given her. Relief punched through his chest so hard it almost hurt. He gathered her up in his arms, shielding her from the rain. "I've got you," he breathed, voice breaking. But the victory lasted seconds. From the shadows, a low chuckle drifted through the rain, slow, mocking, familiar. Damian turned, gun raised again, eyes narrowing. A tall figure stepped forward beneath the flicker of lightning. The grin that met him was a wound he'd thought buried forever. "Raphael," he growled. The traitor smiled wider, his rain-soaked hair slicked back, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You always did make an entrance, boss." Damian's trigger finger twitched, his jaw tightening. "You're making a mistake." "No," Raphael said calmly, his tone almost polite. "You made the mistake, trusting me." He circled slowly, the stormlight catching the pistol in his hand. "You think you can protect her? You couldn't even protect your own kingdom. The crows are back because of you. You built your empire on blood, and now it's time you drown in it." Damian's glare burned through the rain. "You sold out everything we built, for what? Money? Power? Freedom," Raphael said simply. "The broker doesn't own me anymore. I own him. And soon, I'll own everything you love." Damian's hand trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of holding himself back from pulling the trigger right there. He could end it. One shot. But Raphael wasn't alone, Damian knew it. He heard movement in the woods, the faint click of safeties being released, the shifting of boots through wet grass. They were surrounded. Elena's voice broke through the calm in his ear, static crackling. "Damian. What's happening? Do you have her?" He pressed his earpiece tight, whispering, "I've got Arya. Stay inside. Lock the others in the safe room." "Damian, there's smoke, do it." He snapped, eyes never leaving Raphael. The traitor smiled, tilting his head. "Still barking orders like a king, even when your castle's on fire." Damian adjusted his grip, his voice low. "You talk too much." Then, movement. Raphael raised his gun, and Damian dove sideways just as a shot exploded through the clearing. He rolled behind the van, returned fire, each round echoing like thunder. Bullets tore through the rain. Sparks flared against the metal frame. Arya screamed, covering her ears. Damian reached for her, pulling her beneath the van. "Stay down, sweetheart," he whispered. Raphael's men emerged from the trees, 5, maybe 6 of them, masks on, guns drawn. Damian's breath came fast, shallow. He counted his remaining rounds, 3. "Not enough. You can't win this, Damian," Raphael called out over the gunfire. "Even if you kill me, she dies next. The broker's already ordered it. Your bloodline ends tonight." The words hit Damian harder than any bullet could. His chest tightened, rage threatening to consume him whole. He looked down at Arya, her tiny face streaked with tears, and something inside him snapped. He stood, no longer thinking, no longer feeling fear. Only fury. He charged. Gunfire erupted again, deafening. Damian moved like a storm unleashed, silent between shots, precise, merciless. He took one man in the throat, another through the knee, then grabbed the third by the collar and broke his neck with a brutal twist. Raphael's smirk faltered for the first time. "Still the monster I remember," he sneered. "Still the father you'll never be," Damian shot back, raising his weapon. But before he could fire, Raphael hurled a flash grenade at his feet. A blinding white light consumed everything. Damian staggered back, ears ringing, vision spinning. He fired blindly, one shot, then another. Silence followed. When his sight returned, Raphael was gone. Only the sound of the van's engine echoed through the trees as it roared to life in the distance. Damian ran toward it, firing, but the van disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but burning tire tracks in the mud and the faint cry of his daughter in his arms. He fell to his knees, holding Arya close as rain poured down, washing the blood from his face. "It's over," he whispered to her, though even he didn't believe it. In the distance, his mansion burned, flames devouring the home that had once stood as a symbol of his power. He carried Arya back through the storm, his muscles trembling, his mind clouded with vengeance and guilt. Elena was waiting by the gates, soaked, trembling, her eyes wide when she saw him. She ran forward, collapsing into him, clutching Aria's small body, sobbing uncontrollably. "You found her," she cried. Damian said nothing. He just pulled them both close, his jaw tightening as he looked past them to the burning mansion behind. "They wanted a war," he muttered. "Now they'll get one." Elena looked up, her face streaked with soot and rain. "Damian? You can't fight them all." He met her gaze, eyes burning like fire in the dark. "Watch me." Lightning flashed again, and in that brief light, high on the hill overlooking the burning mansion, a lone figure stood beneath an umbrella, watching them. The broker. He lowered his umbrella slowly, smirking, and whispered into his phone. "Initiate phase 3, take the other 2. Rain pounded against the windshield as Damian Moretti's black car tore through the city streets like a creature possessed. The world outside blurred into streaks of silver and red, streetlights and blood, merging into one endless fever dream. His knuckles were white around the steering wheel, his breath shallow but burning, every heartbeat a war drum. Aria's terrified scream still echoed in his skull, each second replaying like a blade twisting deeper into his chest. He didn't feel the pain from the wounds on his arm, or the bruises from the night before. He felt only rage and love, two fires that had finally fused into one unstoppable storm. The city slept under the storm's shadow, unaware that its most feared devil was coming home to burn the darkness to the ground. The coordinates Elena had given him glowed on the dashboard screen, an abandoned dockyard by the East River, long used as a smuggling port. Raphael's last known base. The closer he got, the thicker the fog became, and with it came the ghosts of his past, the faces of every man he'd buried, every sin he'd justified in the name of control. But this time, he wasn't doing it for his empire. He wasn't doing it for pride. He was doing it for the little girl who called him daddy through her tears. The car screeched to a halt outside the docks. The silence after the engine cut off was deafening, just the sound of rain on steel, and the faint creak of a rusted crane swaying above. Damian stepped out, trench coat soaked instantly, pistol in hand. He didn't call his men. He didn't trust anyone anymore. This was personal. Each step echoed against the wet concrete, slow, deliberate, a death march. Then, a flash. Muzzle flare from the warehouse ahead. A bullet whistled past his cheek. He didn't flinch. He fired twice, 2 quick shots, both hitting their marks. The guards fell without a sound. He pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into hell. The warehouse was a cathedral of violence, flickering lights, crates stacked like tombs, and men waiting in the shadows with rifles raised. Damian didn't hesitate. He moved like a ghost through the aisles, every movement precise, fueled by fury and instinct. Gunfire erupted, echoing against metal, sparks showering the floor. He ducked, rolled, fired back, one shot through a skull, another through a heart. The air filled with smoke and screams, then he heard it, a familiar voice. "Damian." It was Elena. He spun toward the sound. She stumbled out from behind a steel crate, blood streaking her arm, eyes wild with pain and determination. "They took her upstairs," she gasped. "Raphael, he's got Aria." Damian's throat went dry. He reached her side, gripping her shoulders. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," she lied, pressing her hand against the bleeding wound. "Go get her." He hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "Stay low. Don't die on me." She gave him a broken smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." Then they moved, together, through the labyrinth of chaos. Bullets shattered lights overhead, plunging them into pulsing darkness. Damian led the way, his fury now sharpened to surgical precision. For every man who stood between him and his daughter, he left a body behind. Blood smeared across the floor as he climbed the metal stairs, Elena limping behind him. Lightning flashed through the shattered windows, illuminating the final door at the top, reinforced steel, a crow painted across it in black. Damian kicked it open. Inside, the world froze. Raphael stood at the far end, holding a gun in one hand and Aria in the other. The child was crying, her small body trembling in his grasp, her hair matted with tears. Let her go, Damian said, voice low and lethal. Raphael smirked. You came alone, he said, almost amused. Didn't expect that from the great Moretti. Damian took a step forward, gun raised. You made one mistake, Raphael. And what's that? You touched what's mine. Lightning flashed again, and Damian fired. The bullet grazed Raphael's shoulder, spinning him back. Arya screamed. The gun fell from his hand, sliding across the floor. Damian lunged forward, slamming into him, both men crashing into the wall. They grappled viciously, fists and fury colliding. Raphael was faster, but Damian was relentless. Years of violence had made his body an engine built for this, destruction in motion. Raphael drove a knee into his ribs, grinned through blood. You were never a father, Damian. You're a curse. Damian's head snapped back, then forward, smashing into Raphael's nose. Maybe, he growled, but I'm her curse. He slammed Raphael to the ground, grabbed his own dropped pistol, and aimed it straight at his former friend's chest. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Rain leaked through the roof, dripping between them, washing away the blood like tears from heaven. Raphael laughed weakly, his teeth red. You'll never change, he whispered. You'll always be the devil. Damian stared down, chest heaving, eyes burning, not with hatred, but something far heavier. You're wrong, he said softly. I finally know what I'm fighting for. Then he pulled the trigger. One shot. Silence. Raphael's body went limp, the echo of the gunshot fading into the storm. Damian dropped the weapon, rushing to Arya, scooping her into his arms. She sobbed against his chest, clutching his shirt with trembling hands. Daddy, she whimpered. It's okay, he whispered, his voice breaking. Daddy's here. You're safe now. Behind him, Elena staggered into the room, bleeding but smiling weakly through tears. She fell to her knees beside them, brushing Arya's hair back. For the first time in what felt like eternity. The nightmare was ending, but the price of redemption still weighed heavy on Damian's soul. As dawn began to creep through the shattered warehouse windows. Damian looked down at Raphael's lifeless body, and saw a small device blinking red in his hand. Before he could react, a digital voice crackled softly from the floor. Backup protocol initiated. Target, Moretti bloodline. Then the screen went black, the blinking red light died out, leaving behind a silence that screamed louder than gunfire. Damian's pulse thundered as he stared at the dead man's hand, at the tiny detonator clutched in Raphael's palm. Something was wrong. Backup protocol initiated. Those words clawed at his mind. He looked at Elena, who was clutching Arya tight, her face pale beneath the flickering light. Elena, he said, voice low and shaking. We need to go. Now. Before she could respond, a faint ticking sound began, coming from beneath the floor. A trap. Damian's instincts exploded. He grabbed Arya, pulling her close, and shouted, "Run!" The three of them sprinted toward the stairwell just as the world behind them erupted. The blast shattered the walls, fire roaring through the warehouse like a beast unleashed. Metal screamed and concrete cracked as the explosion hurled debris across the room. Damian shielded Arya with his body, crashing through a door that burst open under the pressure. They hit the ground hard outside, rolling across wet asphalt as flames devoured the building behind them. Elena coughed violently, crawling toward him. Damian, the others? Your men, they're gone, he cut her off, voice breaking. It's just us now. He looked back at the inferno, the last remnant of his criminal empire collapsing into ash. His legacy, his sins, his war, all of it burned in that fire. For the first time in years, Damian Moretti had nothing. And for the first time, he felt free. Hours later, dawn rose slow and golden over the Moretti mansion, or what was left of it. Windows shattered from the shockwave, smoke curling through the marble halls, but the laughter of children broke through the silence. Arya sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, the triplets huddled around her, their tiny faces glowing in the morning light. Elena sat nearby, her arm bandaged, exhaustion softening her usual fire. Damian stood in the doorway, watching, a man once feared now trembling with something foreign. Peace. Elena looked up at him, her lips curving into a tired smile. She asked if you were coming, she said softly. Damian exhaled, walking closer. He knelt beside Arya, brushing her hair away from her face. Hey, princess, he whispered. You okay? Arya nodded, eyes glistening. I was scared, Daddy. I know, he said, voice cracking. But you were brave. You saved me too. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him alive. Elena watched, her heart breaking and healing all at once. I told you, she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. You'd be a great father. Damian looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a moment, the devil of the underworld vanished. All that remained was a man who'd lost too much, fought too long, and finally found what mattered. No, he said quietly, shaking his head. I'm just a man trying to fix what I broke. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, lighting up the once dark mansion with warmth it hadn't known in years. Damian walked out to the balcony, Elena following him. Below, the garden was a battlefield of memories, graves, scars, and new beginnings. He turned to her, eyes softer than they'd ever been. We're not running anymore, he said. No more hiding. No more blood. Elena stepped closer, resting her hand against his chest. Then what now? He looked down at her, the hint of a smile touching his lips. Now. We fight for us. Behind them, the sound of children's laughter filled the air again, a melody that drowned out the ghosts of the past. The wind carried the scent of rain and roses. Washing away the smoke, the camera panned out slowly, over the mansion. The rising sun, the man once called the devil now surrounded by love, family, and redemption, for the first time in his life. Damian Moretti wasn't the villain of his story. He was the proof that even devils could be saved.